let's take a look at putting our information together to write a two-column proof. Directions. Complete the following two-column proof. Two columns because one column for the statements and the other for the reasons. Given segment AB is congruent to segment DB and C is the midpoint of segment AD. Prove triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DBC. Now, what we are trying to prove, we remember, always goes at the end. That's the last part of our proof. That's what we're trying to show is true. And what we have at the beginning is the stuff that's given. Use what's given at the beginning. So let's go ahead and write our given information. Segment AB is congruent to segment DB. What's the reason that's true? Because it was given to us. We didn't have to think of it. Let's mark that in our picture as we listed in our statements. AB is this segment, and it's congruent to DB, that's this segment. Also, C is the midpoint of AD. C is the midpoint of AD. So I'm going to write again what they gave us. And that it's given. We didn't have to think of it. But I also need to mark it in my picture. But I have to think here. What does it mean that C is the midpoint of AD? I see the word midpoint and I think to myself, oh yeah, that means C is in the middle. Well, what does middle mean? Each segment to the right and left is congruent to each other. So I'm going to mark that these are congruent. Now, I had to use the word midpoint. So because I had to use the word midpoint, what I'm doing is thinking of the definition of midpoint. And that allowed me to say that this segment's congruent to this segment. So I'm going to write that those segments are congruent. AC is congruent to DC because of the definition of midpoint. Anytime I'm using a word to figure something out, it's the definition of that word that is the reason that I can write it. What else do we see in this picture that we know is true? Well, I don't have enough information yet to give one of my congruence postulates or theorems, so I've got to think of something else. I see that these two triangles share this side. Remember, when triangles share a side, the side is always congruent to itself. So I'm going to say that segment BC is congruent to segment BC. The reason is the reflexive property of congruence. Now, do I have enough information to say my triangles are congruent? Well, it might be kind of hard to see if we can't see the triangles separately. So let's go ahead and draw our two triangles separately. We've got ABC, and separated from it, we can write BDC, this triangle on the right. Let's also put the congruent marks. We've got 1 slash, 2 slash, and 3 slash like that on the triangle on the left, and on the triangle on the right, they look like this. Now the markings are the same, so I'm going to pick one of the triangles and mark that this is a side, this is a side, and this is a side. They have congruent marks. The angles don't have any congruent marks. Therefore, I know I can apply the SSS postulate, and that's always to tell me that triangles are congruent. So now I've reached the end of my proof where I'm going to write that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DBC. Why do we have more lines? Well, sometimes you can prove things in a different way. So we have to be ready just in case we take a different path. Thanks for watching.